Hello, and welcome to the Market Bull podcast. Please note, topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial or investment advice. Today on the show, I spoke with Ron Manners, who was the founder and former chairman at Croesus Mining, which at one point was Australia's third largest gold producer. Now Ron is the current executive chairman of Manwest Group and the founder and chair of Mannkal Economic Education Foundation, an Australian free market think tank. Ron's contribution to mining in Australia earned him an induction into the Australian Mining Hall of Fame in 2011 and was made an Officer of the Order of Australia in 2020. Ron talked about his approach to business and his thought process in order to solve problems as they emerged. Ron talked about his failures and what he learned from them at such an early age and throughout his career. The conversation then focused on Ron's recent experiences in Europe, where he presented 3 speeches about energy, economic reform, and entrepreneurship. I hope you enjoy listening. So, hello and welcome to the Market Bull podcast. I'm your host, Ben Kostrich, and joining me for the conversation today is Ron Manners. Welcome to the show, Ron.
Pleasure to be here, Ben.
I was going to say, for those, I would assume most people would know you. You're a global man. We're just saying you've gotten back from Europe and then you went to Canberra, and I've been trying to pencil in a face-to-face conversation with you. But you've got an incredible rich history in WA, in business, in mining. I don't even know really where to start with introducing you. I know you've got... you're induced into the Mining Hall of Fame. You've done so much over your career, and now you're really involved in education and free think tank, and we're speaking in the Mannkal offices today. But where do we even begin with you? I mean, if you're flashing back to early days, you was a kid back in Kalgoorlie. Talk to us about your story and how you've emerged.
Ben, it's an interesting one. We don't think too much about how anything starts. We just think about it in the present time. But if I think back, I can almost say that everything good that's ever happened to me has been an accident. I think you opportunities come along, and I think if you tune your mind to recognise these things as not as obstacles and not as misfortunes, but as they're opportunities, and if you can seize them and grab them by the throat and shake them and turn them around to your advantage and lever off that, and you're so well able to cope with the next misadventure of it. I even wrote a book about all my complete failures in life.
We were talking about that before, because that's what...
I called it heroic misadventures. They were absolutely disastrous. How one person can fail so often. I turned it into a book. I'll tell you, I made a lot of money.
A successful failure book.
A complete sellout.
Yeah.
Selling. I mean, I hear about people writing about their successes, but something you write about your failures, and it becomes a success that you sell so many books. So I think that's really been a sort of a repetitive thing, and that you find yourself in hot water or with a real problem, insurmountable. Sometimes I've not known where to turn, and you just think about it for a while, and then you realise that you're the only person that knows you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And you sit still for a while, and you say, well, only one person's going to get me out of it. It's the same guy that got me into it.
But I mean, this whole story, everything that you've done, you've really taken the risk. And I mean, going back when I was reading your book, talking about even your first job when you were 10 years old doing newspaper, and you've probably heard that a lot of times. And the one that I cracked up about, we were laughing before, was the toilet paper device that you created, and you mentioned that in your recent speech that you were in Estonia, and even your the crystals, the crystals company. I mean, how and why did, at the time, it's clearly a personality trait of just taking that risk and running with it, and you've adopted it throughout the time. But how do you go about doing that?
Well, I guess you've probably got to be as old as me to remember that we talking about toilet paper, but that was a situation that I was confronted with. Back in my days, we had these little, we call them dunnies, out in the backyard somewhere, and there was no such thing as those very comfortable rolls of toilet paper. It was just magazines or catalogues or whatever, or leaves or whatever was available. And then along came the toilet paper. Then everyone very proudly hung a little toilet roll holder. And I just, every time I went to what they used to call dunnies, you find you're the guy that you got the last piece. You know, I thought, well, that's no good. So let's organise something that has two rolls, so at least there's a follow-on thing, and you minimise the inconvenience. So I made one of these things in my uncle's engineering shop, and just bent a few bits of what they quarter-inch round material and welded them with a little hole, and then a few mates saw them and said, "Oh,
I want one.
Father's Day's coming up. I'll buy one for my dad or for the mother or whatever." Whatever was going on, and I had this little production line. I was about 15 or 16, and I get so busy with it. So then I put an advertisement in the weekly magazine, I think it's called Pix or something or other, and they were selling them all over Australia, and it was just, and then I sort of felt that I had to miss a day occasionally of school to catch up with the.
Yeah, well, I mean, the idea of having a garage-made contraption that holds two rolls of toilet paper would have been revolutionary. And I mean, even to think of that, and then transitioning to what you've done in the mining space in particular. I mean, how did you transition and get yourself into mining? And
well, I guess from the toilet paper thing I came across when for some reason, running a mining business and mining equipment and engineering business with my dad, Calgary, where we were based, was pretty stagnant. It was before the nickel boom. The gold industry had vanished. There was nothing much happening. So my dad and I decided we'd get a little farm in Esperance and run a few sheep or cattle down there for a couple of days a week, and we commute up and down, and we had a little branch in the business in Norseman, and that was just because there wasn't enough to occupy us fully with the business in Calgary. And I found that you want to buy a farm in Esperance, the only way you could buy a farm was to buy some really rotten, salty land, because everyone had got in first. Got on the decent
taking
land.
the good stuff.
So I ended up with a horrific piece of land. There was salt pans everywhere, and I thought, well, this is a pity. There's out of Calgary, there was a shortage of water. In Esperance, there was too much water, and they created all this salt. In fact, just started reading around. I found in Turkey they'd developed a species of salt-tolerant plant called Puccinelia. So I imported. Took about 6 months to import it and get all the permission to bring it in from Turkey, and I planted it down there. This virtually ate the salt. So you could plant it around the little salt pans, and then after another season, you find that the salt pan was smaller, and it created was a stubble like these, so the stock could walk the stubble in and create a mulch on which other things like wimmera, ryegrass, and all the other species would then take. And you find suddenly there was no sign of a salt pan. You'd rehabilitated the land, and this was as if by magic. But I only did it because I had a rotten bit of land.
Well, as you said, you've sort of converted it into an opportunity. Then going from there, what was next?
I think then I got some sort of award for being a rehabilitation land expert, and I think that led me to get selected for the Duke of Edinburgh Study Conference in 1968, which then opened up a whole new series of opportunities. I ended up going to England the following year, and again to Canada, and one thing led to another. Then I think back in the mining thing, we saw there was a phase where nickel got off to a really good start. Looking back, you can realise why it was a good start, because the nickel industry in Australia got launched in the middle of a nickel labour strike in Canada, which was providing most of the world's nickel. Suddenly there's a labour strike which cut the nickel production in the world by half. And at that stage, Western Mining had just made a discovery, and they decided to get into business quickly. They got into business, they got contracts, but the high price didn't last forever, and then suddenly everyone was having trouble making profit out of nickel mining.
Yeah.
The price had come down, the costs were going up. I took 3 months off and went around the world. I went particularly to Sweden. I went from the north of Sweden in Lapland right down to the south. I went underground on every mine in Sweden to find out how they were managing to mine what we regard as subgrade iron ore, copper, and other materials. How did they do it? And it was because they'd pioneered these low-profile diesel-operated equipment to use underground on the mines. And we in Kalgoorlie were still using air-operated little handheld boggers. And I said, well, that's okay. So we then ended up importing millions of dollars worth of these, what they called Kirina trucks. They were low-profile because they'd organised them to have 2 big Volvo engines side by side to get the size down. Instead of having one big engine, you had 2 side by side, so they could get them down in small tunnels. And then we had to overcome the problem of the exhaust. Diesel, you couldn't use diesel engines underground because
the chemicals and the breathing. Yeah.
So that was just at the time, 1974, when they were bringing in catalytic converters, and these were all fitted up with cylinders full of millions of little platinum prills to purify the air, and the air was pristine. You could breathe the air coming out of these diesel engines, and this was just a trend we pioneered, bringing those back. Then we brought in 3-boom drilling jumbos to replace the handheld rock drills that the miners used to use, and it was just a continuing process. And by the time the nickel industry came back again, it was a very, very efficient industry, which it is today. And I think that the gold industry took up. It virtually vanished, but it came back today. I think it's almost the anniversary of Nixon breaking the gold link between the US dollar and the link, and that was $35 US. Up until that time, and then since then it's been able to. The gold in the free market has found its own level now. It's $2,000 in US terms, or $3,000 in Australian terms. Fantastic! Well, the industry is up and running. So it was just so. It's nothing smart, nothing brilliant about that. It was just there. I was as these industries emerged. But you felt that you had to be part of it. You had to contribute to it.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say it was this sort of fortune. I mean, it was thinking outside necessarily the box and taking, as you said, like a risk, which goes into the entrepreneurship side of things, and just thinking how can things be improved and how can you change traditional ways of doing things. You know, looking at the plant for the salt, and then revolutionising the mining, and then I mean, you've really gone through all of this. You've as we said, gone all over the world, seen what everyone's doing, and now you've found a real passion for education. But I know it's not just been something that's emerged recently, and mentoring and tutoring and helping people understand and encourage free thinking. But where did your passion for that come about, and even starting Mannkal?
Well, that was pretty easy in a sense, because I think I collect stuff, I've got all this, I'm sort of a historian at heart. Probably came out of my grandfather and my father. They collected all this stuff, and I'm now finding it's useful. But then one day at about 1987, I think I was based in Kalgoorlie. I had a shed full of all this stuff, and I got a call from a young fellow at UWA called Bill Stacey. I didn't know who he was. He didn't know. He'd heard of me. He said, "I believe you got a shed full of material on the history of the Australian libertarian or free market movement, where you've kept a lot of stuff on the people that were involved over the years." And I said, "Yeah, sure." It's out the shed, covered with dust, all the cupboards and stuff. He said he'd like to come up from Perth. He's doing a master's degree on the libertarian enlightenment of Australia, and can he access this? I said, "Feel free. Come and stay with us."
Yeah, come up and come across and see me.
He dug his way through all the stuff in the shed, and he ended up producing an amazing document as a thesis, and we use that document today as an introductory text for the Mannkal scholars, which you read that and that'll put you completely in the picture, bring you from where it was to where it is today. And Bill is now a director of Mannkal and Manwest, our company, and a very good friend of mine. So it's amazing. So that sort of made me think, how did and do people keep saying, how did you get interested in all this? Well, I said, well, so you sort of pick up something. I was 16, I opened up some boxes of mining equipment, and there was they didn't have bubble wrap in those days. They had packing material, which is old magazines. And I took the magazines home, smoothed them out, and I read them, and they were called the Freeman magazine from the Foundation for Economic Education in New York. And I liked what it was. A couple of years later, I was at the Calgary School of Mines, and I think they said to me, "Oh man, he's not much good at sport or anything else. You may as well be the editor of the School of Mines magazine." And I said, "Well, that's okay."
Why not?
And so I said, "Well, what will I write about?" So you write about what you're reading about. So I went back to these smoothed out magazines and yes, Australianised them a little bit into the context and published them. And the world just about fell on me because Calgary was a highly unionised town, and they said you can't even suggest that people can be successful unless they're a member of a union or you have some union muscle. And I said, no, the world doesn't work like that. It's if you excel, people will respect you, and you will through merit. You will be successful. They said, "Oh no, that's no good.
It's not possible."
So I wrote a letter to the people that produced the magazine. I said, "Hey, your ideas are getting me in a bit of trouble." So the president of the foundation wrote back to me. He called me Mr. Manners.
Very professional. Very nice.
And he said, "No, our ideas are okay." Probably started with Aristotle. They've been polished up by a lot of people over the years. He said, if you're getting into trouble, it's because you haven't got sufficient knowledge to defend your beliefs. So with that in mind, he said, I've put you on the mailing list. You subscribe to the magazines. Here they are. Here's a few books to start with. And if you ever got any questions, write to me. Well, I did start writing to him, and he became my mentor up until the time of his death in 1983. Amazing sequence. Letter writing was a good habit to get into, and I jumped on a plane once. I pulled a little book I wanted. It was a 2-hour flight, so I needed a little book I could read in 2 hours. So I picked a book by F.A. Hayek, the economist, called The Choice of Currency, in which he proposed that if your government were destroying your currency, as ours is today, you should be free to select another currency in which to deal and use your transactions in any currency you choose. The best currency must win. And that was pretty revolutionary then, because it was illegal for Australians really to own other currency. It was illegal back in those days for Australians to own gold. Hard to believe, but this was the law. And anyway, I thought, this is fascinating, so I wrote to him. And he wrote back on his manual typewriter, and we again became very good friends. And then in 1976, I was one of the people we brought. F.A. Hayek had been awarded the Nobel Prize in economics in 1975, I think, that we brought him out to Australia on his tour, and I became a great friend. He invited me in to become a member of the Mont Pelerin Society, which he'd started with Milton Friedman and others in 1947, and it's a prestigious group of 500 or so economists all around the world, and now one thing leads to another. Now I'm a director of it.
Well, and now you're one of the faces. You're flying all over the world for it and speaking all of this.
Yeah, and then you find, oh, you're right. We were talking earlier about the Free Market Roadshow. I often think of it, it's like the eighth wonder of the world, in the sense that it's run by the Austrian Centre for Economics, and they've invited 100 or so people, like me from different walks of life onto a speakers panel. And in each year, the numbers vary a bit, but I think in 44 days, around this time of the year, they visit 38 cities in Europe with a carefully curated little group of 4 or 5 speakers. You go from one to another, and when you go to the other city the next day, the other 4 people are different to the ones you were with, because in their wisdom they know that you've got specific interests that will interest that city or the issues that are confronting that country at that time, and you're expected to contribute to the debate and run a very lively session which is open to the public, and they have their politicians and economic advisors there, and they really hit you with some pretty tough questions.
Yeah, tough questions. A tough question and answer session.
And that's I've been doing that for every year except for the COVID period, and I only visited 3 cities this year: Bratislava, Warsaw. The Warsaw was really a Ukrainian focused group, because they brought people from Ukraine there to Ukraine to Warsaw, because they were uneasy about taking our group into Kiev, and just as well because it was a day of intense bombing. And then we went from there to Tallinn in Estonia, which is another remarkable. Each of those countries are fascinating. They're also,
we were saying
so different.
From my experience in Europe, opposed to sitting in Australia, you drive 3 hours, you're in a completely different culture, environment. And as you were saying, you went to 3 of these cities, you had 3 different presentations, because each of the cities, each of the areas have different priorities of what they're struggling with. So, I mean, within those speeches, and I read all 3, it was the leadership, the entrepreneurship, and then there was the talk about energy. At least that was my understanding. I mean, what were those environments like, and what did you learn in particular speaking at those conferences and finding out what they're struggling compared to what Australia is going through?
Well, that's a thoughtful question, because it makes me think with energy, for instance. Why was I talking about energy? Because they'd seen on my CV that in the mid-1950s I qualified as an electrical engineer.
Oh, yes, and that was the credentials to be on the stage. Far out. Okay.
I was the energy expert. But their impression was that Australia has got the energy situation pretty much under control.
Yeah.
And I said to them, well, it's very hard to explain our energy policy in Australia, because without making it look like a comedy show, they're right in Europe, and they are aware that Russia is blowing up the power stations in Ukraine, for instance. But here we are in Australia, we're blowing up our own power stations and putting it on TV to convince people that
there's a benefit.
Blown up forever, it will never be reopened.
Yeah.
And we're doing this without any concept of having alternative energies ready in time for this. And they're not ready in time. They're way behind. And suddenly we're discovering that these replacement energy supplies are intermittent.
Yeah.
And nobody's factored in, for instance, with solar, that we got a dusty country. Within a few days, we've got those solar panels covered with dust, which reduces their output by 15%. And that's pretty much permanent until it rains. So everyone's been storming along this populist way of rushing towards something that's not ready for us yet. I love electric cars, I love all this stuff, but in their own time.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I will probably end up with an electric car, but at a different time, because you might do short trips, I might do long trips. You might have a garage where you can plug it in. I might have to park in the street and run an extension cord to have people trip out.
A safety hazard.
Or some of my friends are in apartments, and the body corporate won't provide them with a power supply in the car park.
Yeah.
So maybe those people shouldn't buy an electric car yet.
Yeah.
But the fact for a government to come in and pass an edict by a certain day on a certain year, thou shalt not have the ability to buy a diesel engine or whatever, is crap.
Yeah. Well, I've spoken about, because the whole idea that, we've got this speech that we're going towards, electrification of everything, and the idea that the energy consumption that everyone uses isn't accelerating and that we're not keeping up with it is a fact, but it's not really thrown in the conversation. When you look at the trusted power sources like coal and like gas, these are sources that we need, because realistically, energy is what unlocks education, and we know there's a massive concern in a lot of countries and a lot of institutions that the education quality isn't necessarily improving. If anything, it's sort of being whitewashed by certain discussions and talking points, and that's why it's so important to have these free think tanks naturally. But the idea that energy can just be switched on and off, and that solar and wind, and I mean the discussion that we're not talking about in Australia is nuclear, and there's a lot more talk about that in Europe, in France, and just saying that the energy mix is not just one or two components, it's got to be a whole host, because we are consuming more and more.
The people that are talking about it, well, they call it carbon free, they get confused between carbon and CO2. That's a different subject altogether. But they've got to face up to the fact that, and most of those same people are against nuclear, but there's no way they're ever going to achieve what they're trying to achieve without factoring in nuclear as part of this formula.
Yeah.
So they've got to change their whole mindset for it to be. So back to your question, what else did I learn in moving on from that was Bratislava, then going to Warsaw was really a Ukrainian event where they brought the Ukrainians there, and we did. Australia has got a lot to contribute to. The Ukrainian government has got a whole department formed to establish new economic reforms for after the war. So even though the bombs are dropping, their focus is on how are they going to reform their economy and re-emerge as a real powerhouse. And that's good that they're thinking about this, because when they did their economic reforms, when they broke away from the Soviet Union, 1991, this applies to most of those Europeans, former Soviet countries, they had to move very quickly into economic reforms, and they didn't get their privatisations right. And they know that. And they say, now we've got another chance to get it right. Here's an example. When they broke away from the Soviet Union, they said, we've got to privatise. So if you were in a third or fourth level apartment, that cubic space of your apartment became yours.
Yeah.
That was their ideas of property right, but they had no concept of the underlying land, that should be part of your ownership too.
Yeah.
So there's no strata title, there's no way of sharing the land. So these former Soviet very badly built in many
But the ugly looking grey buildings, yes.
Terrible.
Yeah.
They're ready for demolition, but nobody will allow them to be demolished, because their property rights would go poof.
Yeah.
They lose their property rights. So this is a real interesting thing. So we've by zooming in some of their senior members of parliament to our office here in
Perth,
here in Subiaco, we've provided them with full copies of our Western Australian Strata Title Act, which is one of the best. It wasn't so good when they first brought it in, but it's going to be polished up. It's absolutely world class. We've provided them with a full copy of our Mining Act, which again, when it was created in
a lot of backlash,
1904, wasn't
most popular,
capable of dealing with all the new emerging things. But the current Mining Act is a first class, and it's been copied by about 5 countries out of Africa. Our Mining Act is very, very good. So they're working on that now to get their property rights correct, not only in domestic, industrial and mining property. They'll be really good. So that was a very interesting discussion in Warsaw/Kiev. Then we went on to Estonia, Tallinn as the capital city there. totally different. The focus there was on entrepreneurship,
Yeah.
and that's a small country. Total population 1.3 million people, less than the population of Perth.
Yeah.
But their psyche, their style of generating new companies and startups is something to behold. Skype came out of Estonia. It's subsequently been taken over by Microsoft.
Yes.
Just to get the
Technology
out of it,
yeah.
and to steal the people. They're still there. It was amazing. 6 months ago, when I was in Thailand last, I'll mention this because it's relevant. I had a very interesting discussion with. He is an academic, but he obtained from me a year before a book that I wrote called The Lonely Libertarian, and he'd read that, and he said to me, I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but he said, there's some points in there that there's some points of disagreement. He said, from reading your experiences, you obviously don't have much trust in government. And I thought about that. Of course I don't, because I've got so much evidence of
that.
I really have been let down by government so often that I don't have much trust. And that made me realise that in Estonia they had tremendous trust in their government.
Yeah.
And I thought, how fortunate you are. And we discussed this, quite a different attitude to our government, and how it's easy. Life's easy if you can trust your government. Life's easy if you can trust your business partner.
Yeah.
Life's easy if you can trust your husband or your wife or your family.
It's completely.
The whole thing is built on trust. And then when I got back this year, this is a discussion 6 months after. The first comment was, now we know what you're talking about, this distrust. And I said, what's changed? And they said, we had elections about 3 weeks ago. We've got the same Prime Minister, but that Prime Minister has had to do all sorts of funny little deals with extreme
to get into
minor
certain
parties to get anything through.
Yeah.
So they've lost that core function of understanding the limited role of government. What's the legitimate things the government should be doing or not doing. I say that because yesterday I read that our state government has invested $4 million or something in an airline.
Interesting.
An airline here, it's called Nexus. A new airline has just been launched. Well, it's not the role of government to be investing in airlines. Damn it, what?
No.
So right here. So again, I distrust any government that has to invest in an airline when the things it should be doing, not doing very well. So let's get back to the task that we should be giving them. So, and he said, so things have changed, and suddenly they're coming up with all sorts of little funny things, looking for additional taxes. He said the tax structure in Estonia has been rigid. Flat rate tax, 20% since about 1991. Nothing changes. So if you're in business with confidence, you can do your sums, you can launch into something, and it works.
Yeah.
But he said, now this is going to be tampered with every year, like your Australian superannuation fund. They can't, every year there's complete changes. So we started having extreme trust in the superannuation side of that. We would be able to look after ourselves and not be reliant on government. That's not working out very well.
No.
So that was what I learned out of the discussion in Estonia. But they've got another thing. There's almost 100,000 people with e-residency of Estonia around the world. I'm one of them. I got an e-residency for Estonia. It doesn't mean you have to live there or you have to visit there, but you can register yourself there. You can have a company there. It costs you about €300 a year to maintain a company.
An e-company in Estonia.
In Australia, even if you don't do anything, you got to pay $5,000 for an accountant to lodge the necessary forms. So it's just and the person in charge of the e-residency is coming. Our invitation is coming to Perth, and she'll be giving a little talk in our office on the 26th of September, explaining the advantage of e-residency, and run by people like they're digital nomads. But if you're running a company or a startup, you don't have to be where the company is.
No.
You can choose then to live in the best country in the world. You can then work in the best country in the world, which is probably going to be different, and then you can invest. The third leg is reinvesting. You can invest.
You're not constrained
in the best country in the world, which again will be, you will end up dealing with 3 different countries, because never, unless for a momentary flash of time, will the best country to live be the best country in which to work and the best country in which to invest. If it's true this second, it's probably not going to be true tomorrow.
It's going to evolve and change.
So you can choose to live there, work there, have your company registered somewhere else. So there's 100,000 people running around the world doing exactly that from all parts of the world, with an Estonian company running something somewhere else. And isn't that amazing? That's the discipline of the market that brings out the very best, because you can choose the very best for you.
Well, and this is the whole concept that, I mean, even for you starting your entire career, is this stuff would have always been a fantasy, seeing that you could be doing this in the future, and even the adoption and acceleration in technologies. I mean, COVID, for all it's bad, for all the lockdowns, it did show to people that, you can work remotely, you can do things all across the world and almost be as effective, if not more efficient, in that situation. And of course, there was a lot of negatives, a lot of learnings out of it, but the way that people always innovate and look for opportunities is so apparent. And I mean, that floods me back to see the idea of what drives you. And I've seen you ask this question you've been asked this question a few times, like, what happened to your life that made all the difference and gave you this motivation and this drive? And I mean, what makes you every single day want to keep instilling this sort of education and knowledge across to people?
I'm so busy I'll never think about that, but I think it's some insatiable curiosity. But I think it's also more than that. It's by being able to compare all these jurisdictions around the world, all these different situations, makes me realise how lucky we are, how lucky you are, and how lucky I am to be living at a time like this when the choices are all ours.
Yeah.
We're not confined to, but some people are living in countries where they cannot possibly
consider that or see it as a reality.
They wouldn't even dream of suggesting. If you were in Russia, you wouldn't suggest that there's a better place to work. They'd lock you up tomorrow. Same in Hong Kong. There's no free newspapers in Hong Kong. There's no expression. Here, we can say what we like about the president, the premier, the state government, anyone, and we can get away with it as long as it's true.
Yeah.
It must be true. If it's false, then you can be sued. So
yes.
So how lucky are we?
No, agreed. And the ability to express yourself and naturally that's how you learn, by expressing ideas and the idea of that you speak with other people that know things, and that's how you educate and you learn and you shape yourself. You shouldn't be sort of necessarily attacked and ridiculed and bullied for expressing a certain idea. You can be re-educated and aligned, but also that's how you get better. That's how you grow, which I think is, especially, in Mannkal in particular, that's one of the tools that clearly you've instilled in the program is challenging young and up-and-coming students and learners and people wanting to go into the global markets is to do that exact thing.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people have asked me that, and I think this is why we started Mannkal, because people have said, what motivates you? And I look back and I said, well, it's only about... You learn from thousands of people as you pass through your life, but there's only 4 or 5 people that really
stand out,
really
and impact you,
change your direction, and they insinuate themselves into your brain, and they never go away. So I've picked the 4 or 5 models of people.
Your Mount Rushmore.
and they're the people that I've modelled. Those, and it's only the things that have been of benefit that I really look back with extreme gratitude were all happened to me by accident, and they were all short-term things. They weren't a matter of having gone to this school, having been a member of this club, or playing golf, none of those things at all. They were just short, sharp experiences. So I thought, well, if we're going to replicate that and try to create those opportunities for young people, because I think there's a lot of stuff that they're not learning at universities.
Yeah.
We try to provide them with things that they're is not covered in the universities. Anyway, that's
another story altogether. Yeah,
sure
but exposing them to that.
The short, sharp thing is what we do, and these we limit our things to quick events in the office when they're exposed to all these visiting speakers we have, quick, short visits to like the Samuel Griffith Society meeting, which is next in August in Melbourne, the Friedman Conference in Sydney around about the same time, and these are short, sharp things. And by the end of the year, if we can see they're absorbing this stuff, we send them on the 2 or 3 month internship at some leading think tanks around the world, where they sit with people, with tutors who show them how to write research papers and how to structure them correctly and how to produce articles and documents, and these are really world-class people that think like I do, in the sense that they see these people terrific skills, but they're not getting in their own environment. They're not getting these very special skills.
Yeah, these moments that shape and
and what I find a surprising side effect is that so many of these people we send out to these longer term think tanks, they end up getting employed by them full time. We've got them all over the world.
Perfect stepping stone for the job career in a way.
We may never see them again, but they keep in touch with us and keep reminding us that we help them with instill that little element of curiosity, which has got them to where they are. But one of our former students, scholars who we'd sent to Lithuania, actually, he and his wife and family took me out to lunch in Canberra on Sunday after my conference.
Short, quick trip there, yeah.
To sort of tell me about his career path following his trip. He was so impressed with Lithuania that he went back.
He went back. He really did enjoy that time.
Under his own steam, and he's still in touch with them there. So that's what it is. If you can look back, I'm probably looking at life to the different end of the tunnel to you. You're looking at the tunnel looking forward. You tend to look backward and say, what really made all the difference? Some of my friends are brain dead, and I worry about them, but they weren't stretched. They weren't sort of thing, and it's a terrible thing to say, but I look back and say, well, how come I'm still really enjoying it and looking forward to the next
day and the next challenge and the next
going to be presented to me. So I think that's about it. And if we create, and we've got a wonderful team of people here at Mannkal who really are very good at creating the right opportunities for these people to go to. Some people are more economically inclined, some people are more philosophically inclined, some people are interested in politics, which I have no interest whatsoever in politics, but some people are, because they think there's 4 ways to change the world, and politics is
one of them. Yeah.
And the other 2 is education. That's probably more our style. The other third is passive resistance, which is very effective. It's been very effective over the years. And the 4th way is war, straight out of violence, which is, I don't think,
believe in.
a very good option to even consider, but it's on the list of 4 ways. So we've chosen education. Some people choose politics. Well, we'll back them. We'll create political opportunities for them to absorb how they can be effective in their chosen role. Somebody's got
somebody's got to do it. No, I think that's speaking with a lot of the scholars at certain events, you can see that being instilled in them and the drive to do all that. And it's again a credit to your vision and how you've been molded and your experiences and clearly the team that you've built here. But I mean, this has been a very insightful conversation. It's really just the tip of the iceberg as to yourself.
And we encourage all our scholars to really argue with us. We don't want full agreement. There's no fun in that. We want them to develop their own philosophies in life with which they're comfortable and which they can take forward and develop into successful philosophies and a style where they can run a family, run a business, or run a country. These consistent things. I think our form of economics, which is called Austrian economics, is one of self-responsibility, and it's a very valid alternative to the Keynesian economics that seems to be the only diet in economics that's been
people
taught at the
going
universities
for.
now.
Yeah,
that's I think it's been proven not to work. Again, it's when you get yourself into debt, you find the solution is to go and borrow more money. That is not the answer. That's what's got into trouble. And I think the present generation of political leaders should be put over a barrel and whacked because they've left such a mess to the next generation. My parents didn't leave a mess like that. They might not have left much money. Nobody had any money in those days, but they sure didn't. I didn't inherit debt.
Yeah, well, and I mean, the optimism in me is that I'm sure the creativity of people that are young will find ways around it. I think there's so many emerging industries that are clearly trying to disrupt current channels and the way business has been done, and or not even just business, but the way the world has been run. And I mean, the optimist in me is that there will be opportunities. It's just about, if you're young and enthusiastic and you just seize that and really just take an opportunity. But yeah, I really thank you for taking the time to speak with me on the show today.
Okay. Good on you.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow the Market Bull on our socials at Twitter and LinkedIn by searching The Market Bull. You can also subscribe to our newsletter on the website by visiting www.themarketbull.com.au.